hello everyone, and welcome to SFI Podcast, a podcast about all things science. We've got software, security, artificial intelligence, space, rockets, robots, and so much more. But hold on, you might ask, what does SFI stand for? Well, it's actually from Polish, but it means IT Academic Festival. Now, why is that important? SFI is a student-driven initiative organized completely by students from top 4 universities in Krakow and Poland, with thousands of attendees every year, coming to celebrate technology with us and learn a thing or two. Now, the big thing is, it's an event not just for students. We welcome enthusiasts and IT professionals from all around the globe. We have amazing content brought by extraordinary speakers from all corners of science and technology. And guess what? It's completely free to attend. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, we're there. Just search for SFI or SFI Academic Festival. Today, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence taking over the world, voice-driven interfaces replacing keyboards, and is it possible to have a successful career in tech, manage your own business, and single-handedly take care of a family, all that without needing extra 12 hours in a day. This is your host, Jacob Oleszkowicz, and I'm joined by Noelle Silver, Vice President of Digital Technology at National Public Radio. Hello, Noelle. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. We've missed you so much since last year's edition. So, for our listeners, can you give us sort of like an intro about yourself for people who might not be familiar with your work?
Yes, absolutely. I've been in technology basically my entire career, but it started off at IBM, where web services were just being born, service-oriented architecture. And I spent 10 years really kind of honing that craft before going over to Red Hat, where I worked on open source technology. And then I went to VMware and worked on virtualization. And then finally went to Amazon, where I wanted to work on cloud, but Alexa was born and it kind of changed my whole life. So I went and worked on Alexa for 3.5 years, teaching people how to build skills, as well as leading the development of multiple language models on Alexa. And then from there, I went to Microsoft, where I led a bunch of different AI models, not just voice, but computer vision and text analytics, cognitive search, all sorts of really interesting ways to use AI, but for developers. So you didn't have to be a machine learning expert or a data scientist. You could be a developer who just learned JavaScript and now be able to leverage these AI models, which I thought was really amazing. And then most recently, I wanted to do something, you get to a point in your career where you want to do something that is really focused on the world and changing the world. And so I got an offer from National Public Radio, which is a big media organization within the United States, and its mission is to create a more informed America. And I thought my skills in AI and technology in general could really help that cause. And so I moved over about I guess it's 6 months now. I've been there, and it's been a really exciting journey. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's great to hear you transition to that kind of role in changing the world, especially as you said, more informed America, and I guess all around the world in this era of fake news. This is really important. So, how would you say all this experience, especially in AI voice, has helped you in your role right now?
Yeah, so I have media in general, I think, is one of those industries that is behind the curve as far as bleeding edge or leading technology. And so they haven't really adopted AI or automation as much as other industries have. And so things that I'm thinking about is how much time people in the newsroom spend like manually looking through documentation, manually doing like editorial curation, when artificial intelligence or even just simple automation might help them do those things more accurately, more quickly, so that they could focus on the thing that is most uniquely them, which is like building the story and creating, accessing diverse sources for that story. Now they spend a lot of time, doing just very simple things like headline creation or, modifying the website to store an article. They should not be doing these things as a journalist, right? We want to, there's tech for that. And I always say there's an app for that, or there's a voice skill for that. let's figure out how we can leverage tech. So I feel like my whole career has led me up to the point now where I have all these ideas about how the newsroom can be better. And so now it's just a matter of time before I don't want to come in and fruit basket turn over everybody's lives and be like, let's do AI everywhere. So I want to be very mindful and thoughtful, but at the same time, show the industry what's possible. And so I've started to talk a little bit more in the industry, talk at events, and just inspire people to think a little bit differently about how news can be done.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting to see you mention that kind of transition into more of a evangelist and speaker role. So my next question is, do you miss some of the things, or what are the things that you miss from that more developer-oriented role, like building skills for Alexa?
Yes. So I would say I miss it, but this goes back to kind of a little bit in your introduction. I have figured out a way to actually build skills on the side. So I just had an idea, like in the shower, I was like, had this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, I should build a 5-minute kindness meditation as a skill. So I could just say, I just want to simply ask Alexa, give me a kindness meditation. And every time it's different music, but it's the same meditation. And it's just focused on like cultivating a kindness mindset. And I know what I would say to myself in a meditation. So I literally just wrote it down, built the skill. And it's, of course I've built a bunch of skills. So it's a skill set that I have. But I do manage to figure out ways to keep my fingers on a keyboard. Even though I don't, as a vice president, I don't have a chance, maybe rightly so. They don't let me do that work anymore in the organization. But between skill building, I also am really interested in digital media and digital marketing technology. So like building sales funnels, which is still very technical, like building pages and building lead magnets and funnels and all of these things. So I find ways to keep my mind engaged in like technical implementation, even if it doesn't happen to be directly, I'm not an independent contributor in my company anymore. But I do think that like that's the beauty of GitHub. That's the beauty of Hackster.io. Just recently I was on the BBC World Service because they wanted someone who had built basically a robot at home, and I built a bartending robot with like DC motors and silicon tubing, and of course it was Alexa enabled, so I could just say, Alexa, make me a Negroni, and it would pump alcohol out of 5 different bottles into a single glass. And I, could I just buy something like that? I'm sure I could have, but no, it was and it was of course built on a Raspberry Pi. So I find ways in my personal life to just keep my skills engaged, because it's a very real part of who I am.
Wait, that's a really interesting side project. Like some people might think, technology is just, writing stuff at a computer, but here, like, you do a level of coding, and you're like the most popular person at a party.
That's right.
So, do you have any other interesting side projects that you did?
Yeah, so once I got involved in like the Raspberry Pi, I built a Raspberry Pi plant waterer, of course, Alexa enabled. So I have an orchid and I have a aloe plant that both need really small but consistent water. And so I measured exactly how much they need. I programmed using Python. I got to learn Python doing this, but I programmed using Python my Raspberry Pi to turn on the pump and turn off the pump in just the right amount of time so they get the right amount of ounces. The only thing I didn't do, because I didn't want to, is schedule it so that I wouldn't even be involved. Like it would just do its thing. I wanted it to be voice enabled. So in order for it to work, I do have to say, Alexa, water my plants. But it is pretty cool. And Alexa is actually built into the Raspberry Pi. So it's not like I'm using the Alexa ecosystem, right? I'm using Alexa voice service, which is a very different thing. So I got to learn a whole new way of working with the technology, which is really neat.
Yeah, I think that gives you like a lot of power. Walk into your house. It's not automatic, so you have to say, Alexa, do this, that.
Yeah.
You're like,
I think it's awesome. I mean, I now I look around and I'm like, what can I voice? What can I voice enable around here?
Yeah, so maybe a good question is anything in your house not voice activated?
Well, so I will tell you, I have 133 voice-enabled devices, but that includes light bulbs. So we have tons of light bulbs, and each one is its own individual thing. But yeah, I try to And I did this for a reason, though. For those who don't know, I do have 4 kids at home, but I also have my dad who lives at home with me, and he's like in his 70s, and he was in a car accident, so he's got some cognitive disability. So this gives me the ability to make everything accessible to him because he can't get on his phone easily. He doesn't even want to get on a computer anymore. So having Alexa, every day he listens to Alexa and he gets like the virus report or whatever, and he takes notes, and any question he asks Alexa. And it really has made him much more independent, which I am super grateful for, because with 4 kids and a full-time job and all these side hustles, like if I had to take care of him like intensely on top of that, I don't know, something would have to give. But Alexa's really made that possible. And I feel like, I have tons of anything I can voice activate, I do. But now with the Raspberry Pi, I'm thinking even if it's not possible, maybe I could make it possible. So it's a lot of fun.
Right, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do in this ecosystem. So for people who want to actually do those kind of projects and get started in this, say, voice development, what are some of the places where they can get started and gain the necessary skill set?
Yeah, so one of the places I would go just to find some ideas, and also because it provides the schematics, the ingredients, if you will, or all the things that you need to buy. Sometimes people load the code, is that site I mentioned earlier, Hackster.io. And Hackster.io is like basically just where everyone goes, like for any hack that they have. But Alexa has its own like section of that site dedicated to these types of projects, like Magic Mirror and how to take a mirror and make it a display, kind of like a Fire TV, but in a mirror, so you could ask it what the weather is while you're putting on your makeup or shaving or whatever men and women do independently in the bathroom. But in addition to that, there's also a hackathon site which I really enjoy called DevPost. And so a lot of organizations use this to host their hackathons, but DevPost also has hackathons of their own. So I'm always looking for hackathons that have themes. So many times I'll hear things like a smart city hackathon, where if it's a smart city hackathon, there's lots of different ways people are going to hack about smart cities, like fixing parking and fixing traffic. And then me, with my very specific voice interest, I think about how can Alexa do this? And there's just not enough of us voice developers out there. Whenever you go to a hackathon, there's very few people focusing on the voice UI. And I think it's so critical because people like my dad, and my oldest son has Down syndrome. So like his world is driven by what he can say as opposed to what he can type or what he can look up on a phone. So I want, the more hackathons I can get into and expose people to like, this is all it would take to build a voice UI. That's what I would want to do. So those are 2 sites. GitHub, of course, is how I got started. So I, oftentimes when people ask me like, how'd you get started in Alexa? I literally went to Alexa's GitHub repo and started rebuilding all of their projects. So at the time they only had like 12, and I rebuilt them all. And then I went back and forked them and customized them all to Noelle's version. And then I published those customizations. And then I, took 2 of the customizations and smushed them together and created a new thing. And I feel like that's a really good way to learn, right? Because you are hands-on practically learning as you're picking up the technology. So that's the other thing I would do, is go out to GitHub and just take a look at, and maybe not look at other people's code who are not certified by, Alexa, just because it might be broken. But definitely if you look at Alexa's GitHub, you can see people who have done really successful projects there. And that's a great way to learn.
Great. And now we have one question coming from our listeners. Guys, if you want to ask our speakers some questions, we gather them, I think 1 or 2 weeks before every recording. So you can go to Facebook or Twitter and ask your questions there, and we'll do our best to include them. So one question here related to picking up that voice skill set. How technical do you need to be in order to grasp all those voice-related AI algorithms and techniques? Do you need, knowledge in signal processing, all that crazy math and stuff?
Yeah, so this is probably one of my favorite questions, because it is a big misunderstanding. So there is part of AI that, sure, if you're going to build a model from scratch, if you're going to build machine learning algorithms that have never been built before to solve problems that have never been solved before, you probably are going to need some pretty significant experience, skill sets, PhDs in that subject. However, today, what I'm most excited about is the fact that these companies have commoditized AI. So they've made it possible for someone like me, who is technical, but not like, I'm not like classically trained computer scientist, but I'm technical enough to go in, learn one of these scaffolding languages like Go, Python, even I used to know Java, so I was able to use that skill set to build a new Alexa skill. So yes, if you're a little bit technical, that helps. But I will just say my 9-year-old, now 13, but at the time, my 9-year-old built a skill. What was it called? The mythical unicorn trivia skill. Built this skill 3 years ago. And as a result of 4 years ago of building this skill, Alexa 3 years later started paying him $50 a month in developer rewards because of the amount of users that have collected over this time. So surprise, 9 years old, very little technical skills, was able to use the Lighthouse skills, the GitHub blueprints, customize that code, not build it from scratch, but customize it, build a skill, add content that was relevant to them, and then actually release a skill that's used today to the point where they're making a tiny bit of money, which I think is interesting. Now, if my son was so motivated, maybe he would go in and be like, oh, I should add new features and build on it and create more use cases for it. He's not. He's like, $50 is awesome. So he's just coasting on $50. And then the last part of that question is there is a no code option available. And I always like to tell people that are content creators about this, because if you are a content creator like this podcast or a blogger, any of those types of content creation, you have a YouTube channel, you can go out to blueprints.alexa.com, I think it is. Yeah, blueprints.alexa.com. And these blueprints allow you to, without any code, go in, provide all the content for a skill, and the code will be generated and hosted on your behalf. So you don't even really need to have any technical skills. You just have to have good content these days. And those can be either published locally to your own Alexa, or they can be published to the world. So lots of options today.
Great to hear that, especially for people who have many interesting ideas for, fun stuff like the app your son made, or maybe some more serious for changing the world. And
Yes.
they don't need a technical skill set, just need creativity. So I want to transition to more of a more technical topics, let's say. So a few years ago, or maybe a few months ago, you were big on conversational AI. Can you tell our listeners what is conversational AI?
Yeah, so conversational AI, the simplistic kind of definition would be that it is the way that we would be able to consume human speech in order to execute software. So I say something and it's like clicking a button. Rather than me using my mouse to go on a screen and click a button, I use my voice and that same code would execute. So building conversational AI is actually multifaceted. There's different parts of it. The first part is called speech recognition, oftentimes referenced as ASR or automatic speech recognition. And this speech recognition is the first thing, right? It's like taking your speech and turning it into text. Like, just what did you say? Not what did you mean to say, but just what were the words that came out of your mouth that was understood by the system. The next piece is, so that's the what did you say. The next piece of conversational AI is what did you mean to say, which is where natural language understanding comes in, or NLU. Sometimes you might see it listed as natural language processing. And so natural language understanding is the second half, not just what did you say, but what did you mean to say? What did we, as a computer scientist with all of our data, what did we presume you meant by the words that you used? And then both of those things together end up translating what the user says into what we think they said, which is called an intent. And then that intent can map to some kind of computer function executing. Like, making a Negroni, for example.
Where do you see conversational AI and AI in general going in the future?
So I love this question because I've recently identified myself as like a futurist because I think like this all the time, where I'm always like in 2030, 2040 kind of time frame. But the future of conversational AI, I'm counting on it, is that it's much more contextual, much more basically ingrained in how we communicate. As opposed to right now, if you have an Alexa, you have to say to Alexa a certain type of words, like we call it an invocation phrase, in order to like have Alexa navigate to a skill and then launch that skill. It's not natural. Like you have to know to say, Alexa, open daily affirmation, or Alexa, play 1 minute mindfulness. You have to know the names of the skills that you want in order to find them. And it makes discovery of skills very difficult. So where I see the future is that we would just have a class, like a conversation. I would get on my headset and I would just say, one big part of it is it wouldn't matter. Maybe I talk to Alexa, maybe I'm talking to Google, maybe I'm talking to Bixby, maybe I'm talking in my kitchen, maybe it's at work. It wouldn't matter where I am, because the brands that I'm talking to, let's say I go to Alexa and I'm like, Alexa, tell me what's on my schedule. And then Alexa starts reading my schedule, but Alexa doesn't know my schedule. Alexa's going to my Microsoft AI bot that has access to my Outlook calendar and is reading the schedule from there. So there's like all these mini bots in the background, right? Like a Microsoft bot, there's a car rental bot, there's a flight bot, there's a cooking bot, there's a shopping bot. But Alexa is my interface, and it is only my interface for the moment. So I'm in my kitchen, Alexa's doing all this work for me. I go to my office and I can pick up those exact same conversations even if I'm using the speech technology that's embedded in my computer, right? Or if I'm using Siri. It shouldn't matter to me as a customer or as a user who's like interfacing with me. I should still be able to talk to my bank and get the same information. And my bank should know that I was just there, whether I was there on Alexa, whether I was there in my car, or whether I was there in my office. Like I want that seamless, I call it frictionless. I want it to be a frictionless experience where I can just say what I want and get help when I want and literally have like a little virtual assistant who follows me around and does does whatever I need. We're not there yet, but my hope is that brands and companies will start building their little bots so that at one time we can build a virtual assistant layer that connects them all together.
Great. And this scenario you explained, like just checking your schedule. Normally, I would go to my phone to check that. So is there some concerns that this wide adoption of voice interfaces will have, I don't know, some kind of bad effects on other interfaces? Like I said, replacing keyboards?
Yeah, I've heard this before, actually. I don't think so, mainly because the nice thing about voice is I consider it to be a mechanism for accessibility. So it just increases the funnel. So right now, there's a bunch of people on the planet who can't use a keyboard, who can't interact with this software at all. They can't do the things because a keyboard is the entry point. So voice opens that gate. But in the same way that voice opens that, it closes because not everyone can speak, right? So what I would want is I wouldn't want to make, I hear certain leaders in the industry, thought leaders, saying things like it'll make X obsolete. I never think in those terms because there'll always be a constituency or a demographic of individuals that will be the way that they get there. What we want is infinite ways to get there. Voice being one, keyboard being one, I don't know, your phone being one, but I don't see any of them like putting another out of business. I see them as becoming this just multimodal strategy for really meeting the user where they are.
Great. And do you think we will develop technology that will allow for fully cognizant creations?
Not in our lifetime. And the reason I say this is because I've worked with the data scientists that are building this technology, a lot of these technologies. And the reality is that to us as the end user, it looks magical to us. It looks like things are happening that are unscripted or automatic or somehow intelligent. But then as I've worked on these projects, I realized that much of what is happening is actually decision logic, right, is like old school software engineering. It's not even, we call it weak AI. It's like, it's AI because I, as the end user, go, oh my gosh, how did you know that was what I wanted to have happen? But at the back end, it's just a decision tree going through and going, well, if they do this and this and this, that's most likely going to end, if they do A, B, and C, they're most likely going to want D. That's not magical. And that's certainly not a sentient being, it's very much hard-coded decisions right now. And I just don't see us making this huge, giant leapfrog to a place where we're doing unsupervised learning and models are creating themselves. I don't, based on the models that I know and the developers that are building them, we're not as close as people think we are.
So folks don't need to be worried about
That's right.
Robots
Noelle
taking
said
over anytime
it's
soon.
okay.
Yeah, so where does that leave, those voice interface? Like you mentioned, accessibility or just doing a FAQ on a website. Can we do something more with that, with those technologies?
I think so. For example, there's so many different interfaces. Every single application, if every app doesn't have the ability for me to talk instead of type, right, they're missing an opportunity or missing an entire amount of people in the world that they could make accessible to. But this is even as simple as just providing, just from a vision perspective, right? Of course, I'm very conversationally focused, but even with computer vision and the ability for you to put just a small little dialogue on your screen that gives options for people who can't see a screen in the same way that other people can, and just providing accommodations for accessibility. So many pages don't do that, even though that technology has been out for a long time. Another thing is immersive reading. A lot of people have trouble reading like massive amount of words on a page. So there's a new technology, new-ish, called the immersive reader. It's free. You can take it and stick it on any page and it'll break out the text to one word at a time, which makes it easy for almost everybody to read. And people aren't, like, it's not mass adopted. So there's so many little things that, and I think this is true of AI in general, there's so many little things that we could do to make the experience of our users better, to increase the amount of users that could leverage what we're trying to do, to increase the accessibility of our software. And we're not even doing those little things. So it's hard for me to then go even a step further and be like, how do we use AI? Because we're not even doing the bare minimum for our users, like on our websites and in our software and in our mobile apps. There's so much more, these kind of smaller steps we can use, like even just data gathering. Like, thank goodness for GDPR and some of these rules that have made us all be much more honest and transparent about what we're doing with people's data. But I don't even know what these companies would do with that data. Like, a lot of people are collecting data with no idea what they would even do with it. And so I think GDPR now puts a price tag on that. So we now have to be much more mindful about what we're going to do with data that we collect. And is it even worth collecting? Which I think is a really healthy and good conversation for companies to be having.
Yeah, and regarding data collection, obviously, I know for Alexa, for all those invocations, Alexa is recording all of those and storing them. Do you think there's some security concerns in this landscape?
Not security concerns. I think there was a study recently released by VoiceBot AI around consumer confidence, and how consumer confidence is dropping for smart speakers because they're worried about this kind of privacy concern. And I always, I wonder why, like our phone, for example, which has the exact same capabilities, if not more capabilities than the average smart speaker, why that hasn't come under the same amount of scrutiny. Why that microphone and that camera that can be turned on by software, by now we have an average of 75 apps on our phone that we randomly provide accessibility to our, to the operating system for every time we install a new app. But it doesn't have that same scrutiny. And so yes, there's a little bit of a reason to be worried. But the thing I like about Alexa, for example, is that they allow you at an individual level to delete everything that Amazon knows about you. And they're very transparent about what they're doing. So I remember because I was part of the early days of Alexa, where we wanted to make sure everyone who got an Alexa like had a very simple privacy statement that said, we're building something like the Star Trek computer here. Your data is going to help us do a better job at that. Only do this if you want to help. And everyone wanted to help. Now, of course, fast forward, it's now this massive adoption, and there's more people who, either don't read that statement or it gets purchased for them and they don't know what they're getting into. But I mean, data collection was the basis for Alexa. It's how Alexa came to be what it is. So I feel like to have that concern now is kind of like, but I mean, we all built Alexa. Like, it's our data that drove Alexa to be what it is today. So it's kind of hard to now go back and be like, oops, what I meant was I didn't want you to have that. But I love that Amazon took that into account and now says, delete your utterances, all of them if you want to. But I do understand like AI needs data sets, and I'm a big believer in diversity of that data set. So if they're not collecting that information from everybody, I'm worried, right? That they then go and collect it from maybe not as diverse of an audience as their real customer base. And so, yeah, I appreciate that they're collecting it, and I hope everyone knows that they can delete it if they're not comfortable with that.
Right. So how does this diversity of the data set help in creating the AI models?
Yeah, I think this is a critical point. And diversity comes in lots of different ways. But if you think about data collection and everything's done by an individual or set of individuals. And so these individuals will go out into the world and collect data. This is true for computer vision models like facial recognition, where a team would go out to all over the world and take pictures of people to create a facial recognition model. And when they do that, who the person is that's taking the picture, their unconscious bias will choose who those people are that they take pictures of. And unfortunately, user researchers and data researchers have uncovered that all the major facial recognition models in the world began extremely biased to white males. And I understand why, because in the tech industry, most of the people working on these projects were also white males. Not because, they weren't like specifically doing that. They were looking for themselves. It's like a natural human tendency, which is why it's called unconscious bias. But the problem with the lack of diversity on a team is no one's going to raise their hand and be like, has anyone noticed that this all looks like us? Because it looks like them. You need someone who's different to look and go, wait, I'm not in there. Why am I not represented? Why is not this constituency? So I always say diversity is, of course, way more than just gender and race. It's disability, it's introverts and extroverts, it's people with accents and people who don't have accents. Like, you need all of these people involved in not just the creation of the collection of the data, but the creation of the model, the testing of the model, and of course in your customer base to validate that the model is doing what it's supposed to do. And we need companies with leadership that are willing to make the right choices when they realize something's gone wrong. And that's, I think, probably one of the harder things to do.
Yeah, great you mentioned leadership. I know you practice something called mindful leadership. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Mindful leadership, in my mind, I've had the luxury of working for some really great CEOs and executives. And I was in a room once with an executive, and it was around an AI project. And that executive said, if you have to stop what you're doing and literally like lose money for the company or even take a step backwards, do that if it means getting it right versus like keeping going just for the sake of making sure we hit our number or make the revenue targets that we said we'd make. And I felt like that was an example of what I think about when I think of mindful leadership, like someone who's able to take a step back and mindfully consider the impact of, what I call like clarity over velocity, right? Like having a clear understanding of what we want and not just going after like, what's the next transaction? What's the next quarter? Like, how do we make our earnings number? They're actually thinking about what's important for the business strategically. But I also, another principle is, people over really anything, but people over product or people over process, like understanding that your human capital is the most important resource that you have. And so these are the organizations like Amazon and Microsoft that have, like they've got projects that fail massively, like the Windows Phone, the Fire Phone, like they die. But the people on those projects, if they didn't treat them well, they'd have no one to go and build the next Alexa, which is exactly what happened at Amazon, right? Like Fire Phone died and a bunch of people needed a new home. Alexa was born and a lot of that talent went on to build Alexa and even do till this day. So I find that that's a really important part, is that you have to understand your human capital, know it, love it, take care of it. And then as products come and go, that human capital will carry you through. And so it's having this kind of different way of thinking about how to run a business. And I'm hoping we'll see more and more of these types of leaders. I do think, Satya Nadella of Microsoft is probably one of the easiest ones to look at and go, that's like mindful leadership in action, right? Like he makes very intentional statements. It's very hard though, because Microsoft is a huge company and you can't have a bunch of, like there's not a bunch of Satyas in the middle management layer. I wish there were, but there isn't. But it has to start somewhere. And I think he's a great example if you're looking, if someone's looking for one.
Yeah. What books about mindful leadership would you recommend to beginners and people who want to get more in depth in that subject?
Yeah. So I wish I could be like, my book just released, but it didn't. So,
Not quite there yet. Maybe
that's right.
next year.
Not yet. It's been written and then like left alone. But one day when I finish it. But there is a really good book. I don't remember the author, so I'll make sure that I give it to you for the show notes. But it's called Mindful Tech. So, and it's very specifically like mindful leadership in the tech industry. So I appreciate that book. But there's lots of resources on mindfulness. I actually would encourage you, as opposed to reading a book, just actually start practicing mindfulness. So there's a couple different ways to do that. One is there's this app called Calm, and they have like 5-minute mindfulness activities. My Alexa skill is 1 minute of mindfulness. It's 1 minute meditation. That's it. So if you've never done it before, start with 1 minute. But mindfulness is less about learning how to do it and more about actually practicing it. So I'd say get either an app or go to Alexa and just do a 1 minute meditation. Start with 1 minute and build up from there.
Noelle, you're a tech expert, a leader, and a businesswoman, and as we probably heard sometime during the podcast, a parent. How is this possible? How can you do all these things in 24 hours a day?
Yes, I get this question quite a bit because it seems crazy that I have 4 children and my dad, and I'm managing 50 plus engineers at NPR, and then I have all these side hustles. I started Women in AI, and I have AI Leadership Institute. It seems unmanageable. But one thing that I do, well, I'll give a couple things. The first thing that I do is I have a very positive outlook on life. So I make a conscious choice in pretty much every minute to just be happy, positive, optimistic. Like even if things are very bad, I can often kind of look at it and go, all right, well, maybe this bad thing that's happening, I can use it to teach someone something, or I could write a blog about that. I'm always thinking about like how I can turn it around. And I think that mindset comes from practice of just constantly shifting my thoughts away from like kind of that the potential downward spiral of like, oh my gosh, this is bad, and this bad thing defines me, and this bad experience means I can't ever do another thing. Like you let these voices in your head kind of dictate to you that you can't do a thing. And I try to really increase the volume on the voice inside my head that's like, you can do it, this is amazing, you're awesome, which is why I built that Alexa skill, daily affirmation, because anytime I need to, I can go to daily affirmation. It's like, you're amazing, have a great day. And I'm like, yeah, all right. So I think mindset is huge as a mechanism for coping. But the other thing that I have to do, which is I kind of PM my own life. And when I say PM, I mean project manage. So I don't really like project management, but I have to have a pretty specific schedule. So I have a morning routine that I do. It's the same thing I do every morning. I work out pretty much every day. And when I take a day off, like it's no big deal. I'm not like, crazy about it, but I have this like routine of activities that I do that help me stay focused on moving the needle in the areas that I have goals. And then I would say the last thing is really, I just try not to have, I call it work-life harmony. I don't have this expectation that I'm going to be balanced and have scales in my hand where I'm like 50% at work and 50% at home. I have more of this concept of like a virtuous cycle or a flywheel. Like I have a Peloton bike, and I love it. I love spinning, and it's like a stationary bike, right? And it gives me this concept of like momentum. Like once you get it going, it's not hard to keep it going. And so like in my life, I try to do things that are positive and uplifting and meaningful, hence my move to NPR, in my professional life, so that when I'm home with my kids, I feel like I'm doing something fulfilled. Like I feel fulfilled when I'm at NPR. Then I come home from that place of fulfillment, and now I can do stuff with my kids. But I don't, if I measured it by the hour or by the minute or by the day, I would constantly feel like a failure. I could never reach 50-50. So those are some of the things I use to cope, but really a positive mental attitude and probably this concept of work-life harmony are the two key ideas.
Okay, work-life harmony. That's really interesting because we have a question from our listeners exactly about work-life balance, but especially when working from home. So maybe can you share some of those things in your concept of work-life harmony that can be applied in working from home?
Yes. So again, one of the things I have to do because I have kids at home is I have to have a place that I can call mine. So I have a room in my house that is my basement. And literally, and I actually know a couple people that do this, a couple of my cousins, like my family that does this, where they literally will, for a portion of their day, they will walk out the front door for their kids' sake. Now, granted, if you're a single parent like me, it's a little harder. At least I have a teenager home who can like man the kids for a minute while I do some of these sessions. But you go out the front door, and so the kids think you're gone. Like in their head, they're like, oh, mom left. She is out of the building. And then I walk around the back, come downstairs, and then I come to my little room and I work. And then I go back up there. So there's like this natural separation. Even if it's only 20 minutes a day, it gives my brain a sense of separation between, otherwise I get overwhelmed, right? I'm like, sometimes I'll sit there and I'll be like, I need to do the dishes and the laundry and feed the kids and work and message my team and respond to this email. And it's like, oh, I can't. So I really have to avoid that.
Okay, you mentioned women in AI and some other initiatives. Can you talk about some more initiatives for girls in tech, like how to get started, how to combat adversity, and how we in the software development and IT community can help and encourage more diversity and inclusion in tech?
There are so many ways to tackle this one. So yeah, I started Women AI actually just this year on International Women's Day. And I did it because I was just getting so just disheartened every time I saw a panel and there was no, women of color. There were no, there was no other people. It was very homogeneous in nature. And not that that's bad. I mean, I even tried, like I did a post where I was like, oh my gosh, if you are a person of color or a underrepresented minority, reach out to me and I will make sure that you get on stage or on a podcast. And no one raised their hand. So we kind of we have two opposing forces. One is there's not enough of us, but even those of us that do exist, we're kind of hesitant to even take the stage. Sometimes it's confidence or imposter syndrome, and we have the jobs and we're doing the work. We just don't necessarily want to be the poster child, which I appreciate. But at the same time, I'm like, get over it and get up here because I'm here all by myself. But similarly to like AI projects, it's so important these days to really have a diverse, group, like especially for young women or even anyone who's in a underrepresented minority kind of class to look up and see themselves. I mean, it was one of the really nice things that happened at Alexa, where one of the VPs at Alexa came to me and I wasn't an evangelist at the time. I was a solutions architect. And he came to me and he's like, look, I have two girls and I want them to look on stage and I want them to see you or see a woman. And I want them to see a woman with brown hair and, brown skin. I want them to be able to experience that. So it's nice if we can provide that kind of role model, right? Even if you're not confident, even if you're not like you don't think you should be up there, the fact that there's a 14-year-old girl thinking about getting into code, and because they look up and only see men or white men or people that don't look like them, they decide, well, maybe that's not for me. Like, that's reason enough for me to just talk a little bit louder and get up on one more stage or one more podcast, because I want people to see themselves. And I'm just one demographic, right? There's so many ways diversity shows up. I would love for all sorts of people, all sorts of people. I want introverts. I want, extroverts, people with disabilities, like anyone who's doing this type of work should feel like they can stand up and have a voice, and that voice will help inspire other people. And there's just not enough. So every time you'll see me, if, your listeners follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, if I ever see a article that comes out and it shows like all these pictures and the people all look the same, I almost always will take that article and repost it on my page and be like, come on, people, we can do better. Give me 5, scientists that don't look like this, please. But there's a lot of work to do, unfortunately, in that space.
Okay, and you mentioned that you have to really like combat this adversity and speak up and kind of go out of the. Well, what I'm trying to say is like you have this personality, very outgoing personality, but how can more introverted people, especially girls who want to get started in tech, but there's all these comments all over the internet, radio that you shouldn't do. Like, tech is not for girls, essentially. How can they combat this, negativity and adversity?
I think the biggest, when girls look at tech, they first, of course, like we just mentioned, they need to see an example. But the second thing is that they need to have a community. And there's been lots of studies done around this. And we're actually doing quite much better as an industry of funneling people, young people, into the industry. I think our challenge now is once they get here and they do a project or spend a year on a job, they actually don't want to stay because of all the nonsense that happens if you're a woman in tech and you have to explain yourself more than your male counterparts, or you have to constantly like prove yourself where your male counterparts don't have to do that, or you're having to like do much more work for the same level of recognition as your male counterparts. Like those are tough scenarios, and that's not going away, sadly. Like I've been doing this for 20 years and it's been the same the whole time. And so if that's not going away, how do we get people through it? And so I have found that creation of communities, I recently became a member of this organization called Thrive Tribe. It's all about like thriving in tech for underrepresented minorities. And I mean, the whole reason I'm there is because I want to be around people that are just like me, but people that have that mindset of success, that mindset of like, yeah, so what if you have to work extra hard and get the same recognition? It's fun, and we're changing the world, and we're building technology that matters. So you need to be surrounded by people that like know the work that you want to do, support you, and will help get you through those times. Without that community, though, it'll be very difficult, I think, for women in tech, for really any underrepresented minority, to find success, because eventually they'll just get fed up and they'll go leave and they'll do something else, which is sad because I'd love their talent to stay in the industry, but we lose them, not because, and really the only reason we lose them is because we just don't take good care of them. So these communities and there are tons of them all over Facebook and LinkedIn, joining a community and really becoming close with that community to protect you in these seasons of, when you have weird behavior happening at work, or you feel like you don't have enough skills to do what you want to do. You most certainly probably do. You just need a community that will boost you up.
Great. And you mentioned that all those underrepresented minorities need an example. So do you have any role models or people that you look up to?
This is such a sad story. So I remember I was in a coaching program for leaders at one of the companies I've worked for. And there was like 40 of us in the room. And they said, for all of you, you are managers, raise your hand if you ever had, a manager or a coach, that like you loved and was like, look, took care of you, cared for your career, like, did all the things that we were there to learn. And no one in the room raised their hand. Like no one had a manager that they felt embodied the things we were about to learn, which is weird to me, right? Like that means like 45 people, not one of us had a good manager, or a good coach that we could say, coached us. So unfortunately, I feel like I'm part of this generation where that wasn't really the case. But as with most things, when that's not the case for you, at least for my own experience, the pendulum is swinging the other way where I want to do that for as many people as possible, which is why I think I do what I do now. I want to mentor as many people as I can, talk to as many people as I can, and encourage them. But no, I didn't really, I could say people like Oprah, like watching her go from like where she was. There's this woman, I can't remember, Rachel Coleman, and she's not in tech, but she was the first person to show me like a true life lesson, which was she created this program called Signing Time. And of course I had my son who learned sign language. That was his first language. And she created Signing Time. But when I started watching her videos were literally like on CD, and she was in her garage, like no production, no makeup. Like she was literally like just pouring her heart into these recordings. And then selling them, to make enough money to be able to continue to do the work. And I remember like 10 years later, she gets picked up by Disney. Her stuff is on PBS. And of course she's got makeup and her hair's cut and she's like all like made up. But I was like, I think the most important thing was she just started. She started with nothing. She started in her garage. She did these videos. She had no persona. And then she just kept working at it every day, and she had a super strong mission. So that, like, she wasn't my direct coach. I never spoke to her. I think she did send me an autographed copy of something once. But watching these, like, I saw her as a role model of like, just, even if I don't feel good or perfect or polished, like, I feel like it's unfortunate. Like as a woman, I feel like I have to get my hair done and my makeup on before I can go on video, where some guys can just wake up and go on video. But like she inspired me because she didn't, like, that wasn't why she did it. She did it because the information and what she was doing was important. And so that's what I do now. It doesn't matter. You'll see me. I look all sorts of different ways. Sometimes I have makeup on, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm wearing a sweatshirt, sometimes I have a blazer. Like, it doesn't matter because it's the content that I'm trying to get out there that's most important. So that's what I tell people now is I'm like, just do it. There's so many examples of people who just started and it was bad and then it became amazing over time. And I think a lot of things are that way.
Great. And I think that's it's a great example and great story to finish our podcast here. So Noelle, to our listeners, where can we find more of you?
Yes,
if we want to hear more of your amazing stories.
Yes, absolutely. The best thing to do is to follow me on LinkedIn. So I'll make sure you have the link for your show notes. But it's just linkedin.com/in/mindful leadership. That's me. And if you follow me or connect with me, just say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, just so I could put a face to the connection and how we knew each other. And I do LinkedIn Lives all the time where I get on live with you and just listen to questions and try and answer things. And it's just really the best way. You can always find stuff about me on my website, like noellesilver.com. But yeah, it's a really exciting, I love just being connected with people. You can message me on LinkedIn. It's just a much better interface. And though I love Facebook, there's no, kittens or babies or stuff like that. So I very much focus on the professional development of my colleagues on LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with your audience there.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. Like Noelle, you did a presentation at our festival last year. And you literally, like, on the statement, here's my LinkedIn, just connect with me now and we can chat
Yes.
if you have more questions. So folks, don't be worried. Just we're going to have all these links Noelle mentioned in our show notes. So reach out to her and get all that amazing content there. All right, Noelle, it's been a pleasure to join you. And we hope to see you, I don't know, on the next podcast or maybe on next edition of our festival.
That sounds wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.